A woman murdered. A cruel and brazen act conducted by a husband against his wife. Made ever more distressing by the fact that this was carried out in front of hundreds of witnesses. Family, friends, disbelieving onlookers. The culmination of an abusive lifestyle of domestic violence spanning nearly a quarter of a century, where the perpetrator of this reprehensible crime was still considered very well respected within his community and even a gentleman. What would be uncovered, however, was a horrific story of callous and self-deluded entitlement, demonstrated through control, violence, fear, and the belief that to be a man meant protecting your reputation at all costs, even if that meant punishment and death. To make this tragedy worse, this history of violence and control was all too well known to authorities. In fact, what would come to light would be nothing short of gross incompetence by those who operated under the vow of keeping South Australia safe, and instead would fail to prevent the death of this mother of three. We seek to understand the dark and hope to uncover some light in the murder of Zahra Abrahimzadeh on this, the next episode of Just Lawful.
Adelaide is the perfect place to set a horror story. You know why all those films and books are always set in sleepy conservative towns? Because sleepy conservative towns are where those things happen. Exorcism, omens, shining, poltergeists. Adelaide is Amityville or Salem, and things here go bump in the night.
Welcome again to Just Lawful, where things do indeed go bump in the night. My name is Daniel Panozzo, and I am once again joined by my co-host, Sean Fuster.
Thank you, Daniel, and welcome listeners to the first ever fully vaxxed episode of Just Lawful. Daniel and I have had all our shots.
Yes, all of them, including those for COVID-19, Sean.
Ooh.
Before we begin, a huge thank you to everyone listening. If you haven't heard our previous episodes, then we'd strongly recommend and greatly appreciate you heading over to iTunes and Spotify, subscribing, rating us, leaving us a 5-star review. That's how you can help us to get our work out to the masses, and as we call the podosphere, and you can catch up on our journey so far. A quick word about the following episode. If you do find anything that we're going to be discussing distressing, please make use of the following support resources. The Domestic Violence Crisis Service on 1300 782 200, the Domestic Violence Gateway Service on 1800 800 098, and the National Sexual Assault, Domestic and Family Violence Counselling Service on 1800-RESPECT. Also, in regard to this episode, we'd really appreciate if you could take some time to check out the Zahra Foundation website, zahrafoundation.org.au, that's Z-A-H-R-A Foundation, and find out how they're supporting the women and children affected by domestic and family violence. As per the opening of this episode, we're covering a tragic and brutal murder, and it's one that was a culmination of horrific domestic violence. With that in mind, where do we start with this case, Sean?
March 21st, 2010.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I want to start, specifically in the Adelaide Convention Centre. For anyone who's not been to Adelaide, beautiful building right on the banks of the River Torrens. I think it'd be fair to call it the jewel in the crown of Adelaide's riverbank area. At this point, it's a fairly new building, and one of the events being held is the Persian New Year Festival.
Okay.
So Adelaide's Persian community gets together,
Yep.
Big celebration, food, song, dancing, speeches, celebration.
Sure.
A joyous occasion, a time to actually be very proud of your community, of your family, of your friends around you. One of the people working at the convention centre was a beverage server by the name of Clara Ravisi. Partway through the night, Clara had an encounter she will never, ever forget. Someone was running through the convention centre, she remembered. I was brushed aside by him. He was moving very fast and very determined. I saw him run up to a woman who had her back to him. He pulled out a knife and started hacking away, very violently and very aggressively. That's the murder you talked about at the start of the episode, Daniel. A woman with her back turned, stabbed 8 times, as it would eventuate, in public.
Sean, that is one of the things that grabbed me first when we talked about this case was that's not the sort of thing that you hear about in a public arena, as you say. That is something that happens in a dark alley, or it's someone broke into someone's home, or something's happened in that nature where we hear about these events. It's not something we generally see in that nature.
And to take it one step further, as we've already said, this is a case that spirals out of domestic violence. Domestic violence tends to happen behind closed doors. It tends to be a crime of coercion, of intimidation, of power. It doesn't tend to happen in front of 300 shocked people at a New Year's festival.
No.
Just the absolute arrogance and brashness of it is incomprehensible.
It is, Sean. And that, as we said, to happen in front at a celebration or something like that, but in front of that many people is something that is just... that's the shocking part of this to start with. How does something like that happen here in Adelaide? And I shouldn't say here in Adelaide because we know the sort of things that happen here in Adelaide, but it even to hear that on its surface is shocking itself.
The woman who died was Zahra Abrahimzadeh, and the killer was her husband, Ziola.
Yeah, right. So that's a horrible circumstance and situation, and that is the murder as we talk about. I guess to understand a bit more about this, we know that they were husband and wife, but how on earth did we get to that point? And I guess to understand that, where do we start to try and fill in some of those blanks, I guess?
Well, let's do what we always do on this show, and let's talk about the person who deserves to be talked about. Let's talk about Zahra.
Yeah.
Zahra was 44 when she died. A beloved member of the Persian community, beloved mother of 3, renowned for her cooking and for her caring. Just by all accounts, an incredibly lovely human being.
Yeah.
She married Ziola sometime between 1984 and 1985. The records aren't real clear on that.
Yeah.
It was an arranged marriage.
Okay, an arranged marriage.
Yeah, Zahra was Persian and Ziola was Afghani.
Okay, that I don't know a lot about that, I'll be honest, in that sense, and I'm not sure if that's a common, I guess, coming together of those two nationalities, etc. in that sense.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. I have Afghani heritage, but it's several generations back,
Sure.
so I don't have a lot of connection to it at all. What I do know is that regardless of whether it was common or whether it wasn't, there was tension in the marriage from the very beginning. And I want to go on the record here right now and say, when I say there was tension in the marriage, that's not a justification for anything that's about to come next.
No.
That's not a mitigation. That's not a sense of understanding. There is no understanding. There is no mitigation. There is no justification for this. Let's make that clear right from the jump. What there is facts. And the fact is that there was tension in the marriage to begin with, and Ziola decided to expunge that tension with his fists, with his feet, and with his belt.
Okay, so you said almost from the start of the marriage. What is this tension that you're talking about?
It didn't really become apparent to begin with.
Okay.
There were arguments between the two of them, and Ziola would, as I say, take off his belt and whip Zahra with it. He would beat her with his hands. He would kick her with his feet. By the time the family packed up from the Middle East and moved to Australia in 1997, the tension started becoming a little more pronounced.
Okay.
Ziola believed that there were properties back in Iran belonging to Zahra's family that should have been sold for his benefit. The money.
Okay, so I'm just going to recap this. So we're about 12 years on. They've now moved to Australia, but Ziola is under the impression that Zahra's family should have sold properties off that they owned for his benefit, for his financial...
Oh, look, it was much more than impression.
Okay.
He was convinced he was being swindled. He was convinced that what was rightfully his was being kept from him.
Right.
And it was somehow Zahra's fault.
Okay.
And because he couldn't get the money that he felt was due him, the only thing he could do was beat her.
Yeah, okay.
Again, power, control. And he took it out on her all the time. There was an instance where he picked her up and threw her through a window.
Yeah, God.
I just can't even fathom that.
No.
You know, someone that you have made a life with, someone you profess to love, someone you profess to be devoted to in whatever way that he saw that. How does one person pick up another and defenestrate them, which is the word, through a window? It's just, yeah. Look, you don't hear me speechless often on this show or in any other walk of life, but all these years later after covering this case, I still can't get over that concept, that mental image of this lovely woman being propelled through a window.
Sean, I just want to ask, so when you talk about that instance, for example, and presumably others, that happened here in Australia, or was that prior to coming to Australia?
That one happened here in Australia, but the violence began, from all accounts, almost immediately.
Okay, and that's what I was going to ask. So how much do we know? So it was a violent sort of relationship from the go back in before we came to Australia.
20 plus years of this. Can you imagine living with that? And like I said, Zahra was a beloved member of the community.
Yeah.
Everybody that met her adored her. What kind of burden was she carrying internally?
Yeah.
That trauma, that stress, that anguish.
What you're describing there, Sean, unfortunately is, there's a really common theme of domestic violence in its entirety. So it's a horrible circumstance. It's certainly not an uncommon one. Yeah.
To make it even worse, Ziola's violence, his arrogance, his abusiveness wasn't just limited to Zahra.
Okay.
They had 3 children. Their daughter Atena, their son Aman, and their youngest daughter Anita.
Right.
And as each of those children grew, Ziola would take out his anger on them as well.
So it wasn't just confined to Zahra. This was something that he felt was, I don't want to say he's right, but entitled to do this to the entire family.
Entitlement is the word.
Yeah.
You are my family. I can do this because I am the man of the house.
Yeah. Sean, it's a horrible circumstance so far. And look, as we've just covered so far, it's a horrible instance we know at the convention centre. We're getting a bit of an understanding and a background, I guess, as to, Zahra and the other people involved. We'll probably start to move now into some of the leading up to here. Because as you said, this wasn't an isolated incident. This is nearly a quarter of a century of domestic violence. We know, Sean, that the Abrahimzadehs moved to Australia in 1997, and we started to get a feel for a bit of their family life in this respect. They have 3 children. Can you give us a bit more, I guess, an understanding of what does the family life look like in this time for the family?
Publicly, everything seems to be great. Ziola runs a pizza shop. The family work in the pizza shop with him. Children, of course, divide their time between the pizza shop and school.
Yeah.
Arman would later say, "My father was a very well-respected man in the community, and people would often come up to me and say, 'Your father is such a gentleman.' But obviously they did not know about what happened behind closed doors. For my mother, there was nothing much she could do. If you've got a bully over your head, beating you up, you just sit there and cry."
And that is, again, goes straight back to exactly what we were talking about before, that whole concept that, they don't see what happens behind closed doors. It is that, that absolute just... We hear it time and time again, that idea of domestic violence being that thing that is just hidden behind closed doors that people don't get to see. Yeah, tough to hear.
And for Ziola, it was driven by this warped, perverted vision of what a Persian man should be.
Okay.
Not based in any way, shape or form on the reality of what a Persian man should be, but the way that he had conjured it up in his head, filtered through that bitterness, that jealousy, that insistence that he was being swindled out of money. Atena, the eldest daughter, would say, "I had heard him say to my mum, 'I'm not a man if I don't hit you, if I don't kill you.' He'd say, 'I swear to God I will kill you, and I swear on the Quran I will kill you.'" That's not in any way, shape or form reflective of the faith.
No, not at all. I grew up, and one of my good friends growing up was Lebanese of some Arabic descent, and I know a small amount, certainly don't profess to be well versed in it. I know from growing up and seeing his family environment, that is absolutely not part of that process and not part of that, whether it's Persian, Arabic, whatever it is. The Quran does not teach and profess that in that sense. And those words in there, that, I am not a man unless I hit you. I'm not a man. That's got to be really confronting. And I'm going to call it out. Some of the people that we know and that are close to us outside of here, that's going to be really tough for those people that we know to hear those words.
Absolutely.
It's incredibly hard to know that that's the environment they were living in.
It is toxic masculinity. We have a word for it now. We didn't for many decades. I don't think I'd even heard that phrase in 2012.
Absolutely not.
I mean, we didn't know words in 2012 like coercive control either. Our understanding is geometric when it comes to domestic violence and intimate partner violence and violence against women. We are learning more and more as time goes on. For those who are living in the daily reality of it, though, it's attempts to survive. Listen to this from a tenor. Her father burned her fingers when she bit her nails. When she got caught talking to boys, he broke a cordless phone antenna across her neck, whipped her with a belt for an hour, and smothered her with a pillow. And this is a tenor's own words. He said, "I would rather kill you and go to jail than have you ruin my reputation."
That's such a hard thing to hear from the perspective of a man, a father, whatever. Look, and and such a tiny level. I have always bitten my fingernails. It's one of the things about myself. I don't enjoy the fact I do it. It's just a habit I've always had. I'm hearing that, and I'm clenching my fingers and rubbing it. That just makes me feel so ill at ease to hear that a man would do it to his daughter for biting her nails.
I can't believe I'm going to say this. It gets worse. Because young Anita, who at this point in her life was not yet a teenager, was subjected to violence as well. She said that when she was 7 years old, she was punished for taking cigarettes to school. Let me tell it in her words. "I came home from school and my mum was screaming, 'Don't hit her,' and was pulling me back. But Dad locked the door and started taking his belt off his pants. He just started hitting me with it in the leg, asking, 'Why did you do it?' And when I said, 'I don't know,' he would hit me every time, 5 times. The other thing that Anita says is that she heard the violence directed to her mother. When she was about 11 years old, she said she was standing next to him in the pizza shop and heard him arguing with Zahra over the phone. And Ziola said to Zahra, "When I see you, I'm going to get a knife and cut you from the throat down." He was very loud and very angry. This was going on all the time. Armand says that one of the reasons he was spared violence was because he stood up to his father.
Right.
But if he stood up to his father on behalf of his sisters or on behalf of his mother, he was struck too.
Such a strange and interesting dynamic that. And I just want to take a moment to pause and I just want to take a moment to appreciate that some of what we've just spoken over the last few minutes is possibly going to be very disturbing for some people to listen to, and I do hope it hasn't been triggering in that sense. If it has, again, please make use of the resources we talked about at the start of the show, and we'll repeat them at the end. It's such a... This is a hard part of what we do, Sean, having to recall this and be very... And look, we're about factually reminiscing on this and bringing this to the fore. It is tough to listen to, and certainly I do feel for those who may be feeling that, going through, listen to that. Whether that's a partner, children, whatever it is, the concept of burning fingers, breaking the antenna of a cordless phone, belting someone with a belt to that degree. And look, we grew up in a different environment, and back in the day, you might, we cast as getting a hiding, you might get spanked,
the
smacked.
wooden spoon.
It's such a different concept, and it's nothing
There's no
like
comparison.
This. Absolutely
There's
not.
absolutely no comparison. Anybody out there that seems to think that, oh, well, that's disciplining your children, I would like to urge you desperately to rethink your mindset.
Yeah.
That is not discipline. That is control. And control is not necessary, not warranted, and not valid. There should be no abuse of children. If you're one of the people out there that likes to respond to the stories that I put up on Facebook and say, oh, child sex abusers, shoot them all. Any abuse of a child, sexual or not, cannot be condoned and is never to be condoned.
And I'm glad you used that word, Sean, because when you were talking about the control aspect versus discipline, I was going to say the word you need there is abuse, because this is absolutely abuse. It is not control. It is not discipline. It is abuse.
And I'm going to jump ahead of the narrative a little bit here and say, Arman, Atena, and Anita know that we are doing this series. As always, we have their blessing
Yep.
to do this series. We are incredibly humbled and appreciative of the fact that they would trust us to tell their story. That's why we're telling it in their words.
Yeah.
Because it's not about sensationalizing this. It's not about glamorizing this, for God's sake. It's definitely not about that. It's about allowing their voices to be heard, because for 20 years, they were silent.
Yeah.
Zahra can't tell her story because of this.
Absolutely.
And so we are trying to give it to you in their words.
Indeed. We know from the story so far, Sean, that this has been a horrific domestic circumstance and hidden behind those closed doors of what Zahra and these children have had to endure. I'm still waiting, and as bad as this is, we know where it ends. How do we get toward that?
As in all things, there's an escalation.
Okay.
And it comes in 2009 when Ziola's hypocrisy is exposed. Here's a man that's saying, I'm not a man unless I do this. I'm not a man unless I do that. I won't have you ruining my reputation. He was doing a fine job of ruining his own reputation.
Okay, how so?
It came back to the children that Ziola was having an affair.
Oh.
There was another woman in the picture
Okay.
who he referred to as his other wife.
Okay.
He was spending time with her. He was spending money on her. He was lavishing attention and praise upon her, while at the same time taking his misguided aggression out on his family at all times.
That's certainly an aside to what I would imagine a man, and certainly what is promoted, within his own sort of culture as well.
So Atena, Aman, and Zahra confronted him with this, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this was the spark they needed to turn things around, to regain control. Unfortunately, Atena says her father was very loud and aggressive that night and had a rage like I had never seen before. He said to us, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill you all. I will make sure no one knows how you died. I'm going to burn the house down with all of you in it. And Arman says, my father was shouting, I will kill you all. I will kill you all. I just can't live like this anymore. This is a prison. I will burn the house down. I will kill you all. You and I have talked about this off air. There are people out there that are going to struggle with this concept. The hardest thing that a person who is enduring domestic violence can do is leave. It's not as simple as, oh, if you don't like it, just leave. Your finances are tied up. Your housing is tied up. Your possessions are tied up. Your friendships, your family links, everything is tied together in a marriage. You can't just walk away that easily and expect to be able to survive.
The other part with that, Sean, and you're exactly right with what you've just said, in a domestic violence situation, it's something that the Zahra Foundation actually talk about on their website, is the concept of changing the narrative to the word escape.
Yeah.
Because you don't leave this situation, you escape it. As we see in this case, some don't escape with their lives, all escape with harm and damage done. So, as you said, that concept of just leave if you don't like it, it's a very narrow-minded, very foolish way of considering this. It is escape.
But do you know who wasn't foolish and who wasn't narrow-minded? Zahra Abrahimzadeh.
Okay.
Her entire life was centered around not just family, but the concept of hope. She was, as Atena says often, an ultimately hopeful person. And so confronted with a raging psychopath who says, I'm going to kill you all, I'm going to burn you all, Zahra did the most heroic thing anybody in a situation like this could do. She grabbed the kids and she escaped. February 2009. The Abrahimzadehs go to the Salisbury police station and they say, help. This is our situation. We need help. And thank goodness they came across probationary constable Olivia Nagruk of the South Australian Police Department. She'd been a cop for just 2 months. You imagine? Everything we've just laid out, everything we've talked about, and you as a copper with 2 months' experience get confronted with this, hit in the face with a woman, 3 children. Please help us. We have nowhere else to go. He's going to kill us. And Probationary Constable Nagruk, whatever you're doing in life now, I hope you're listening to this because you deserve commendation. She spent 4 hours with the Abrahimzadehs, taking a complete history of the case. She spent the next 48 hours logging domestic violence and child abuse reports, secured crisis accommodation for Zahra and the family, and arranged a restraining order. There are lots of people out there who don't have that experience when it comes to escaping from a domestic violence situation and going to the authorities. Thank God for that probationary constable.
It's remarkable, Sean, as you said, 2 months on the beat, and this is what you're, I guess, confronted with. And to, I guess, go through that process and show that compassion and be able to work through, as you said, the violence report, the children's abuse, and putting a restraining order in place. So from this interaction, at least, it seems like the police took this seriously and we're now going to get some action against Ziola.
Oh, how I wish that were true. How I wish that Probationary Constable Nagruk was the exemplar that went through the rest of this.
I'm going to take it by that tone, Sean, that wasn't the case.
Let me tell you one story to kick this off. Because of what Probationary Constable Nagruk did, arresting Ziola was considered a Priority A tasking. 2 officers were tasked to find him and arrest him. Senior Constables Frank Nazar and Jason Hill. They were told he owned a pizza bar and he might be there. First they went to the family home. Ziola wasn't there. So they moved on to other tasks.
So hang on, what?
They didn't go to the pizza bar. They also didn't call Zahra despite having been provided with her mobile number. They moved on to another task. And Daniel, do you want to know what task they moved on to?
I'm not sure.
Washing the patrol car.
So a Priority A situation of finding this man, we can't do it. We take no further action to investigate how we can do it. So we go, well, we better wash the car.
And refuel it.
Okay.
And this is the beginning of that gross incompetence that you spoke about at the start of this episode. Look, listeners, you're not going to believe what comes next, but trust me, this has been verified, checked 1,000-fold. Between February of 2009 and September of 2009, despite knowing where Ziola lived and where he worked, South Australia Police considered that he had vanished and they could not find him.
Sorry, hang on. So we're talking, is that 5, 6, 7 months thereabouts?
About that.
Vanished. We know where he lives. We know where he works, but vanished.
Absolutely vanished. Look, members of the Elizabeth Police Station's Family Violence Section were involved in this. Senior Constable Richard Hearn, who took over responsibility for the Abrahimzadeh case during March and April 2009, decided the case wasn't high risk and what Zahra had endured amounted to, and I quote, a kick and a slap, unquote. Let me remind you about being thrown through the window. Let me remind you about what had been done to a tenor, what had been done to Anita. A slap and a kick. He would later say, hypothetically, if I had more time, it would have been great to have arrested him and get bail conditions in place. Oh, gee, you think?
Look, I'm trying to comprehend that, Sean, because that's either just, a gross oversimplification and a very blasé attitude, or we don't have the information at hand. But I mean, you're talking about not just the general police, you're talking about a specialised department within that for these sorts of crimes. A, you would hope that they absolutely have all of the information at hand, and B, that's not going to be the attitude.
Well, let's move to his colleague, Senior Constable Greg Flitton. Senior Constable Flitton thought that he could do a better job, thank goodness. He decided that he was going to go talk to the Abrahimzadehs.
Okay.
Not Zahra and Atena and Anita and Arman. No, to Ziola's brother and Ziola's family members who had also moved to Australia.
Okay.
He was going to go to them, and from them he felt he was going to find out where Ziola was.
I can almost see some merit, find out from the family and relatives where he might be. Okay.
They all said they had no idea where he was, and Senior Constable Flitton said, okay, I believe you.
Even though we know where he works and lives.
Yeah, the family doesn't know where he is. Sorry, mate. So, no, that's fine. You don't know where he is. That's that. He has officially vanished.
Okay. I'm struggling to comprehend this so far.
Well, you weren't the only one, because at this point, the Abrahimzadehs, and I'm talking about the people we care about here, Zahra, Atena, Anita, and Arman, are moving from safe house to safe house. They moved into one safe house at one point that had no electricity and no running water. How do you're trying to escape this situation. You don't know where the aggressor is. He's vowed to kill you. You are getting no help, seemingly, from the people who are supposed to protect you, and now you're being put in a safe house where there are no lights and no water?
Yeah, that seems far less than suitable for a situation like this.
As you can imagine, by this point, poor Zahra had a panic attack, as you would. And so a call was made to the police call number, the 131-444 number that we're all told to call if it's not an emergency. The response they got was, and I quote, "What do you want me to do? I suggest you try going to a hotel or call crisis care." That's what the police operator told them. What do you want me to do? I don't know. Your job? Facilitate communication between victims of crime and police? Maybe that would be a good start?
Yeah.
I hate to say that it gets even worse. May 15, 2009, in the midst of all Ziola's being vanished business, Zahra sees her brother-in-law's car parked outside the safe house.
Hang on, what?
Yeah, the brother-in-law is parked outside the safe house. First of all, how the heck did he know where the safe house was? And I don't have an answer to that.
Well, I was going to ask you, Sean, we don't know where our own brother is. I'm good enough, however, to find out the safe house that my sister-in-law is staying in. Okay, yep, that seems incredibly just odd.
So, with Zahra understandably distraught,
Absolutely,
terrified, now that the power's on finally and the water's on finally, Arman calls a domestic violence counsellor that they know, that's been working with the family.
Okay.
She says, "Leave it with me. I'll make some calls. I'll get this sorted out." So the counsellor calls police, and she speaks to an operator called Kelly Van Dongen. And she says, "I just want to flag this with you guys, that this is going on, that the family's being menaced. We just like it flagged. We'd like police to know what's happening." And Miss Van Dongen replies, "We don't have any control about flagging a certain address. We don't deal with any flagging of addresses."
Yeah, we're not about flagging the address. I think you've got an ongoing case here that you possibly might want to understand. This is a circumstance which is now growing out of that situation.
Missing the message by getting hung up on the terminology, flagging.
Yeah.
I just want to bring this to your attention that it's a choice of phrase, and yet it seems to have gummed up the works. I feel so sorry for that poor domestic violence counsellor who was doing her all to help.
Yeah.
And this operator just plane flies overhead, you know?
So we don't flag addresses, so what happens?
Well, Arman has to explain to his mum, "Look, I don't think any help's coming." And he said later, "We didn't really get an answer from the police. And after I explained that to my mother, she was frustrated and upset that she was not being taken seriously, that her claims were not really being taken into consideration."
I'm a little stupefied by that. But if beyond my stupefied circumstance or concept here, we've got a woman here who is sitting, as you said, not knowing where the aggressor is, having now what looks like potentially the support system's falling around. How on earth did Zahra cope or respond? What was she going through in this sense?
Well, it comes down again to that one word that defined her, hope. Arman said, "My mother had a saintly patience, and she inspired us all to have strength and to persevere. She was not only my mother, she was my father figure as well, the source of my morals and my ethics. During those dark times, she was the one who picked up the pieces, kept us all going, kept us together, and kept us safe."
Crazy, just saintly woman to be able to demonstrate that under the circumstances. oh my God, having to demonstrate that under those circumstances, though, Sean, is just, it's baffling how this is falling apart.
You want baffling?
Yeah.
Despite the apparent inability of South Australia Police to find a single man who has a registered address and a registered business, that he has vanished from the face of the earth, Anita, Atena, and Arman still saw their father regularly.
Well, hang on, how is that possible if this man's vanished?
The law couldn't find Zahra Abrahimzadeh, but it was still working on his behalf. Anita was a minor, and that meant he still, as a father, had visitation rights.
Hang on a minute, Sean. We are talking about a man who's vanished but has custody visits for his children, yet the police can't find him at home or at work. Sorry, can you put some sort of semblance of reality understanding around this for me?
How do you put a semblance of reality around a situation that is that ludicrous? You're asking 2 adult children to take their underage sister to go see the man who has repeatedly threatened to kill them and burn the house down around them, enforced by law. If they don't do this, they've done the wrong thing, yet the police supposedly cannot find this man to arrest him.
I can't understand that vortex of just sanity and semblance of like reasonable understanding. How is it that it's enforced by law, but the law can't find the man that it's enforcing them to go and see?
It's working for the abuser. The law in this case was working 100% in favour of the abuser, not the abused. It was enabling his continuing attempts to control his family.
I can't get my head around that. Beyond that, forget me in this situation. How on earth was it for those children having to be put in that position?
Can you imagine sitting there across
No.
from this man
No, I
who had
can't.
done these things? Arman and Atena are putting up with Zahra saying, I haven't been arrested. This means, look at me. I haven't been arrested. Nothing's wrong. Clearly nobody cares about your lies and what you're saying.
So he's being braggadocious about this as well.
Absolutely, and he's got every reason to be braggadocious at this point. He has gotten away with threatening the lives of those nearest to him.
Wow.
And he goes further. As Arman and Atena remembered, he took these opportunities to proclaim he would have his revenge. He told them, everyone has their limits, and if I reach mine, consider yourselves warned.
Hang on, so now, beyond bragging about not being arrested for this, he's now putting threats of retribution in place?
Well, there's a problem there.
Yeah.
That's a threat of retribution, right? You said it yourself. That's how you see it.
That's how I take it.
That's how I see it. That's how Atena and Arman saw it.
Right.
You know who didn't see it that way?
Who?
South Australia Police. The kids went and reported this to the Netley Police Station to Senior Constable Ian Thomas, and Senior Constable Ian Thomas decided it doesn't constitute a threat.
How can that not be considered a threat when we've got a history of violence? We've got a family that has removed themselves and been housed in safe houses to get away from this situation, and that's not a threat. A man, as you said, and let's face it, I don't know that even in my most angry moments, I'd have the whereabouts to say, I'm going to kill all of you and I'm going to burn the house down and they'll never know how you were killed. That's some forethought. Like, that's real. Like, how is that not considered a threat?
Forethought is the name of the game, because emboldened by all of this, Zahra did the most arrogant thing imaginable. March 9, 2010, 13 days before Zahra was murdered, he asked his restraining order be varied.
What?
He asked his restraining order be varied because he wanted to go to the Persian New Year Festival at the Adelaide Convention Centre.
What?
Yep.
He asked to... So... Hang on, so he had a restraining order. Of course he did. I'm thinking this through now. Of course he had a restraining order. He's asked to have that amended so he can attend the event.
The man who the police cannot find turns up at the Port Adelaide Criminal Justice Section next to the Adelaide Magistrates Court. They're attached. They're one building.
Yeah.
With a lawyer in tow, and files a 3-page affidavit saying, I'll be a good boy. Let me go to the Persian New Year Festival. I won't go anywhere near my family.
Why isn't he arrested on site?
I don't No. You know what else I do know, though?
What?
The file on his alleged violence, and I have to say alleged at this point, because these were allegations at the time. They
Okay.
hadn't been proven yet.
Okay.
57 pages
57 pages of alleged violence.
versus a 3-page affidavit saying, I'll be a very good boy. You guess who wins?
No.
The Port Adelaide Magistrates Court signs off on the variation, and to add insult to injury, SAPOL approach the Abrahimzadehs and tell them this is a good thing.
Hang, what? How on it? I'm sorry, I was under the impression that he just turned up at this event. You're telling me he had permission to be at this event?
That's right. He had court-issued permission to be there.
And then the South Australian police went to Zahra and her children and told her it's a good thing?
That's right. Sergeant Tina Smith told Zahra, this will strengthen the order.
In what way?
It boggles the mind, doesn't it? This concept that maybe the order is going to be stronger somehow because he's allowed to go somewhere where you'll be, but he knows what the restraints are. I guess she was thinking, look, we haven't been able to find him for all these months. He's been the vanished man. Now at least we'll know where he is, and therefore we'll be able to make sure he doesn't do anything.
This is not a man that I would consider someone who knows how to demonstrate restraint in any sense of the word.
Absolutely not. And yet, his lawyer promised the court, gave an undertaking that her client would not, in any way, shape, or form, now let me read the words here, would not approach or communicate with Zahra if permitted to go to the convention centre. Now, he certainly didn't communicate with her, but we know he well and truly approached her, as that beverage server said, high speed, knocking her aside, stabbing 8 times from behind. Let me take you back to that night for a moment, Daniel. It took a security guard less than 3 seconds to disarm Ziola after the murder. He said, Ziola was calm and he did not react to me in any way. His expression after the stabbing was a blank stare, as if he were daydreaming.
And with that, we're going to leave this story as it sits for our next episode when we move beyond what has been just a mind-bending, outstanding, boggling set of circumstances here. Next episode, we will move into the court process. We will move into how that plans out. And fair to say, based on what we've spoken about on this episode, Sean, it's not plain sailing.
It's not plain sailing at all. It is one of the more torturous court processes I've seen, with an ending that comes out of absolute nowhere.
It's been bizarre so far, and if that wasn't bad enough, what's made this worse? It's a horrific, tragic set of circumstances that's evolved. It's some really just questionable understanding of processes and systems which have allowed this to be enabled, as you said, to actually get to where we are now. This has been a very strange set of circumstances so far, Sean.
And look, it's not going to get any less weird the further in we go. Can I just say at this point to all of our listeners, thank you so much for listening so far. This has not been easy for us. I can only imagine how difficult it has been for you. Daniel, give them those resources again, because guys, you should reach out if you need these.
Absolutely. Like we said at the top of the episode, if anything we've spoken about has been distressing, and I recognise some of this certainly may have been, please make use of the following resources: the Domestic Violence Crisis Service on 1300 782 200, the Domestic Violence Gateway Service on 1800 800 098, the National Sexual Assault, Domestic and Family Violence Counselling Service on 1-800-RESPECT. I also recognise that we do have a number of, and a growing audience of, our international listeners. Please, they're obviously Australian numbers and they work here. Please take the time to sort out and seek whatever is the appropriate service in your country, wherever you may be.
As we say here on Just Lawful, vulnerability isn't a weakness. Vulnerability is a strength. It means that you know that you need to reach out for help, and you know there's nothing wrong with reaching out for help. Please use those resources, talk to people around you, and realize that domestic violence is everybody's problem.
Absolutely. A little bit further to that, I talked about it a little at the start of the episode, and we'll certainly talk about this some more, but the Zahra Foundation, I want to give you a bit more about that. So that's the Zahra Foundation.org.au, Z-A-R-A-H Foundation. Look, that's a collaboration of Zahra's children, Atena, Aman and Anita, in conjunction with the Women's Safety Services of South Australia. And they actively support the women and children which are affected by domestic violence. They do a lot of work, a lot of programs around that, a lot of work to help those, certainly from a financial perspective, which is often a forgotten part of the domestic violence controlling piece, is the financial aspect of that, which traps a lot of people. Hence, when we talked about the escape piece before. Another organisation I want to take a moment to recognise and talk about here is an initiative called DV Safe Phone. This is an organisation that collects, repurposes, and gifts mobile phones to victims of domestic violence. Often within a domestic violence situation, a victim's mobile phone is either taken, destroyed, or controlled by an abuser and monitored in that sense. Who are you talking to? Where are you going? What is that around that?
We're in a world where you can download apps
Absolutely.
to trace phones. You don't need to bug it anymore like, the spy movies.
No.
You can just track people. It's horrific.
It is. The DV Safe Phone initiative, their mission is to put a safe phone into the hands of every victim of domestic violence in need. You can visit and support them via dvsafephone.org. It's an amazing organisation, which was bred off, almost fell into the concept of finding out that this was such a needed resource.
It's where all my old phones go.
Absolutely. They are able to be collected and donated all around Australia, and there's some really great points. I know, for example, Jeep Australia, if you go to a Jeep dealership, you can give your phone over there, or please certainly visit those guys, dvsafephone.org, and look into the great work they're doing. We're really happy to be able to bring that forward on an episode such as this. With that said, I just want to thank everyone, of course, who has listened to the broadcast here on 5AA, or if you have caught our episodes on our podcast on iTunes and Spotify. Again, we thank you so much for listening. Your feedback is so warranted, and we just appreciate it so much. Please rate, review, subscribe. 5 stars absolutely gets us up the charts. It gets us out to a different audience that may not necessarily hear us directly. The 5 stars, the algorithm they use, actually gets us out and bumps us up when people are searching for things to listen to, so we couldn't ask you for more.
And if this episode hasn't convinced you that what we're saying on this show needs to get out to a broader audience, that more people need to understand the resources that are there, but also the threats and the problems that are there, nothing will. So please help us get this information out.
Absolutely. If you want to get in contact with us, any feedback, commentary, etc., you can do that at Just Lawful Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, at Just Lawful Pod on Twitter. You can follow Sean's work with The Advertiser and all of Adelaide's true crime stuff with at Sean Fuster on Facebook and Twitter. I couldn't be more serious about this when I say, when we look at an episode like this, we just want to remind you to enjoy our work, but don't become our work. And we'll speak to you on the next episode of Just Lawful.